Welcome to the Liberty Myself Emancipation Media Club. Today's reading is
A Letter Concerning Toleration by John Locke.
This is part of our twice-daily content heartbeat designed to help build information autonomy in our algorithm-dominated world. Listen, reflect, and engage however works for you. Without further ado, let's jump in. Stay free.
A Letter Concerning Toleration by John Locke. Since you are pleased to inquire what are my thoughts about the mutual toleration of Christians in their different professions of religion, I must needs answer you freely that I esteem that toleration to be the chief characteristic mark of the true church. For whatsoever some people boast of the antiquity of places and names, or of the pomp of their outward worship, others, of the reformation of their discipline, all, of the orthodoxy of their faith. For everyone is orthodox to himself, these things. And all others of this nature, are much rather marks of men striving for power and empire over one another than of the Church of Christ. Let anyone have never so true a claim to all these things, yet if he be destitute of charity, meekness, and goodwill in general towards all mankind, even to those that are not Christians, he is certainly yet short of being a true Christian himself. The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, said our Savior to his disciples, but ye shall not be so. Luke chapter 22. 25. The business of true religion is quite another thing. It is not instituted in order to the erecting of an external pomp, nor to the obtaining of ecclesiastical dominion, nor to the exercising of compulsive force, but to the regulating of men's lives, according to the rules of virtue and piety. Whosoever will list himself under the banner of Christ, must, in the first place and above all things, make war upon his own lusts and vices. It is in vain for any man to usurp the name of Christian. Without holiness of life, purity of manners, benignity and meekness of spirit, let everyone that nameth the name of Christ depart from iniquity. 2 Tim. 2:19. Thou, when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren, said our Lord to Peter. Luke chapter 22:32. It would, indeed, be very hard for one that appears careless about his own salvation to persuade me that he were extremely concerned for mine. For it is impossible that those should sincerely and heartily apply themselves to make other people Christians, who have not really embraced the Christian religion in their own hearts. If the gospel and the apostles may be credited, no man can be a Christian without charity and without that faith which works, not by force, but by love. Now, I appeal to the consciences of those that persecute, torment, destroy, and kill other men upon pretense of religion, whether they do it out of friendship and kindness towards them or no. And I shall then indeed, and not until then, believe they do so, when I shall see those fiery zealots correcting, in the same manner, their friends and familiar acquaintance for the manifest sins they commit against the precepts of the gospel, when I shall see them persecute with fire and sword the members of their own communion that are tainted with enormous vices and without amendment are in danger of eternal perdition, and when I shall see them thus express their love and desire of the salvation of their souls by the infliction of torments and exercise of all manner of cruelties. For if it be out of a principle of charity, as they pretend, and love to men's souls that they deprive them of their estates, maim them with corporal punishments, starve and torment them in noisome prisons, and in the end even take away their lives, I say, if all this be done merely to make men Christians and procure their salvation, why is it that they do not likewise exercise such discipline upon their own people, who, living in manifest violation of the Christian law, are in no less danger of perdition? Either these zealots do not believe their own doctrine, or they are less concerned for the salvation of their own flock than for that of others, which is absurd. But it is not my business to inquire into the motives of these men's actions, but to consider the nature of the thing itself. And I say that the business of true religion is not to domineer over men's consciences, but to direct their lives in the way of piety and virtue. If, like the captain of our salvation, they sincerely desired the good of souls, they would tread in the steps and follow the perfect example of that Prince of Peace, who sent out his soldiers to the subduing of nations, and gathering them into his church, not armed with the sword, or other instruments of force, but prepared with the gospel of peace and with the exemplary holiness of their conversation. This was his method, though if infidels were to be converted by force, if those that are either blind or obstinate were to be drawn off from their errors by armed soldiers, we know very well that it was much more easy for him to do it with armies of heavenly legions than for any son of the church, how potent soever, with all his dragoons. The toleration of those that differ from others in matters of religion is so agreeable to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and to the genuine reason of mankind, that it seems monstrous for men to be so blind as not to perceive the necessity and advantage of it in so clear a light. I will not here tax the pride and ambition of some, the passion and uncharitable zeal of others, to show why this plain truth is not received by all men with that readiness which might be expected. These things are not my present business. I shall only show that, by the principles of the Christian religion itself, and by the dictates of common reason, it is unlawful to persecute men for their religion, or to use force in matters of conscience. Section on Separation of Church and State, Limits of Government Authority, Genuine Belief, and Social Peace. The Commonwealth seems to me to be a society of men constituted only for the procuring, preserving, and advancing their own civil interests. Civil interests I call life, liberty, health, and indolency of body, and the possession of outward things, such as money, lands, houses, furniture, and the like. It is the duty of the civil magistrate, by the impartial execution of equal laws, to secure unto all the people in general and to every one of his subjects in particular the just possession of these things belonging to this life. If anyone presume to violate the laws of public justice and equity, established for the preservation of those things, his presumption is to be checked by the fear of punishment, consisting of the deprivation or diminution of those civil interests, or goods, which otherwise he might and ought to enjoy. But seeing no man does willingly suffer himself to be punished by the deprivation of any part of his goods, and much less of his liberty or life, therefore is the magistrate armed with the force and strength of all his subjects, in order to the punishment of those that violate any other man's rights. Now that the whole jurisdiction of the magistrate reaches only to these civil concernments, and that all civil power, right, and dominion, is bounded and confined to the only care of promoting these things, and that it neither can nor ought in any manner to be extended to the salvation of souls, these following considerations seem unto me abundantly to demonstrate. First, because the care of souls is not committed to the civil magistrate, any more than to other men. It is not committed unto him, I say, by God, because it appears not that God has ever given any such authority to one man over another as to compel anyone to his religion. Nor can any such power be vested in the magistrate by the consent of the people, because no man can so far abandon the care of his own salvation as blindly to leave to the choice of any other, whether prince or subject, to prescribe to him what faith or worship he shall embrace. For no man can, if he would, conform his faith to the dictates of another. All the life and power of true religion consist in the inward and full persuasion of the mind, and faith is not faith without believing. Whatever profession we make, to whatever outward worship we conform, if we are not fully satisfied in our own mind that the one is true and the other well-pleasing unto God, such profession and such practice, far from being any furtherance, are indeed great obstacles to our salvation. For in this manner, instead of expiating other sins by the exercise of religion, I say, in offering thus unto God Almighty such a worship as we esteem to be displeasing unto him, we add unto the number of our other sins those also of hypocrisy and contempt of his divine majesty. In the second place, the care of souls cannot belong to the civil magistrate, because his power consists only in outward force, but true and saving religion consists in the inward persuasion of the mind, without which nothing can be acceptable to God. And such is the nature of the understanding, that it cannot be compelled to the belief of anything by outward force. Confiscation of estate, imprisonment, torments, nothing of that nature can have any such efficacy as to make men change the inward judgment that they have framed of things. It may indeed be alleged that the magistrate may make use of arguments, and thereby draw the heterodox into the way of truth, and procure their salvation. I grant it, but this is common to him with other men. In teaching, instructing, and redressing the erroneous by reason, he may certainly do what becomes any good man to do. Magistracy does not oblige him to put off either humanity or Christianity, but it is one thing to persuade, another to command, one thing to press with arguments, another with penalties. This the civil power alone has a right to do, to the other good will is authority enough. The civil power, then, can have no right to compel men to embrace this or that opinion, because the understanding cannot be forced. In the third place, the care of the salvation of men's souls cannot belong to the magistrate, because, though the rigor of laws and the force of penalties were capable to convince and change men's minds, yet would not that help at all to the salvation of their souls. For there being but one truth, one way to heaven, what hope is there that more men would be led into it if they had no rule but the religion of the court, and were put under the necessity either of quitting the light of their own reason, and oppose the dictates of their own consciences, or blindly to resign themselves to the will of their governors and to the religion which either ignorance, ambition, or superstition had chanced to establish in the countries where they were born? In the variety and contradiction of opinions in religion, wherein the several princes of mankind are as much at variance as in their temporal interests, What hope is there that any one of them should hit upon the true one, unless he make use of his own judgment in the choice of his religion? The power of the magistrate, therefore, cannot reach to the saving of souls, because it cannot reach to the changing of men's judgments. These considerations, to omit many others that might have been urged to the same purpose, seem unto me sufficient to conclude that all the power of civil government relates only to men's civil interests, is confined to the care of the things of this world, and hath nothing to do with the world to come. Let us now consider what a church is. A church, then, I take to be a voluntary society of men, joining themselves together of their own accord in order to the public worshipping of God in such manner as they judge acceptable to Him, and effectual to the salvation of their souls. I say it is a free and voluntary society. Nobody is born a member of any church, otherwise the religion of parents would descend unto children by right of inheritance, as their estates do, and everyone would hold his faith, as he does his lands, by patrimony, which is not the way to heaven. The bonds of this society are the consent of the members, and their obligation to one another in the due performance of those duties which their profession and their subscription to the rules of the society require. The end of a religious society, as has been already said, is the public worship of God, and, by means thereof, the acquisition of eternal life. All discipline, therefore, in such a society must tend to this end, and be suited to it. The arms by which the members of this society are to be kept within their duty are exhortations, admonitions, and advices. If by these means the offenders will not be reclaimed, and the erroneous convinced, there remains nothing further to be done but that such stubborn and obstinate persons, who give no ground to hope for their reformation, should be cast out and separated from the society. This is the last and utmost force of ecclesiastical authority. No other punishment can thereby be inflicted than that, the relation ceasing between the body and the member which is cut off. The person so condemned ceases to be a part of that church. These things being thus determined, let us inquire, in the next place, how far the duty of toleration extends, and what is required from everyone by it. And, first, I hold that no church is bound, by the duty of toleration, to retain any such person in her bosom as, after admonition, continues obstinately to offend against the laws of the society. For, these being the condition of communion and the bond of the society, if the breach of them were permitted without any animadversion, the society would immediately be dissolved. But, nevertheless, in all such cases care is to be taken that the sentence of excommunication, and the execution thereof, carry with it no rough usage of word or action whereby the ejected person may any wise be damnified in body or estate. For all force, as has been often said, belongs to the magistrate, and the use of the sword is committed to him alone. The church hath no power to touch the outward man, her authority is purely spiritual. Secondly, no private person has any right in any manner to prejudice another person in his civil enjoyments because he is of another church or religion. All the rights and franchises that belong to him as a man, or as a denizen, are inviolably to be preserved to him. These are not the business of religion. No violence nor injury is to be offered him, whether he be Christian or pagan. Nay, we must not content ourselves with the bare profession of toleration, there must be a real practice of it, in all the instances of it. What I say concerning the mutual toleration of private persons differing from one another in religion, I understand also of particular churches which stand, as it were, in the same relation to each other as private persons among themselves, nor has any one of them any manner of jurisdiction over any other, no, not even when the civil magistrate, as it sometimes happens, comes to be of this or the other communion. For the civil government can give no new right to the church, nor the church to the civil government. So that, whether the magistrate join himself to any church, or separate from it, the church remains always as it was before, a free and voluntary society. It neither requires the power of the sword by the magistrate's coming to it, nor does it lose the right of instruction and excommunication by his going from it. This is the fundamental and immutable right of a spontaneous society, that it has power to remove any of its members who transgress the rules of its institution, but it cannot, by the accession of any new members, acquire any right of jurisdiction over those that are not joined with it. And therefore peace, equity, and friendship are always mutually to be observed by particular churches, in the same manner as by private persons, without any pretense of superiority or jurisdiction over one another. That the thing may be made clearer by an example, let us suppose two churches, the one of Arminians, the other of Calvinists, residing in the same city of Constantinople. Can either of these churches pretend to any jurisdiction over the other, because the Grand Signior, who is a Mohammedan, is the supreme magistrate of the place? Or, on the other side, can either of those churches assume to itself any power over the other? Because the Grand Signior happens to be of the same religion with one of them? I think it is plain that neither of these churches can have any right to invade the privileges or liberties of the other, either upon pretense of the magistrate's authority, or upon pretense of their own orthodoxy, or of the heterodoxy of the other. And therefore peace, equity, and friendship are to be observed by them towards one another, as the condition of private persons, and no violence or injury is to be offered by the one to the other, either in word or action. What I say concerning the mutual toleration of private persons differing from one another in religion, I understand also of particular churches which stand, as it were, in the same relation to each other as private persons among themselves, nor has any one of them any manner of jurisdiction over any other, no, not even when the civil magistrate, as it sometimes happens, comes to be of this or the other communion. For the civil government can give no new right to the church, nor the church to the civil government, so that, whether the magistrate join himself to any church or separate from it, the church remains always as it was before, a free and voluntary society. It neither requires the power of the sword by the magistrate's coming to it, nor does it lose the right of instruction and excommunication by his going from it. This is the fundamental and immutable right of a spontaneous society, that it has power to remove any of its members who transgress the rules of its institution. But it cannot, by the accession of any new members, acquire any right of jurisdiction over those that are not joined with it. And therefore peace, equity, and friendship are always mutually to be observed by particular churches, in the same manner as by private persons, without any pretense of superiority or jurisdiction over one another. Further section on limits of government authority and social peace. No peace and security, no, not so much as common friendship, can ever be established or preserved amongst men so long as this opinion prevails. That dominion is founded in grace and that religion is to be propagated by force of arms. In the third place, let us see what the duty of toleration requires from those who are distinguished from the rest of mankind, from the laity, as they please to call us, by some ecclesiastical character and office, whether they be bishops, priests, presbyters, ministers, or however else dignified or distinguished. It is not my business to inquire here into the original of the power or dignity of the clergy. This only I say, that, whencesoever their authority be sprung, since it is ecclesiastical, it ought to be confined within the bounds of the church, nor can it in any manner be extended to civil affairs, because the church itself is a thing absolutely separate and distinct from the commonwealth. The boundaries on both sides are fixed and immovable. He jumbles heaven and earth together, the things most remote and opposite, who mixes these two societies, which are in their original end business, and in everything perfectly distinct and infinitely different from each other. No man, therefore, with whatsoever ecclesiastical office he be dignified, can deprive another man that is not of his church or communion of any civil right, upon pretense of his having the care of his soul, or of reforming his manners, because the church, as I have shown, is separate from the commonwealth, and has no jurisdiction in temporal affairs. The clergy, therefore, must content themselves with the spiritual arms of exhortation and excommunication, and leave the use of force to the civil magistrate, whose proper business it is to restrain men from injuring one another in their lives, liberties, or estates. But idolatry, say some, is a sin, and therefore not to be tolerated. If they said it were therefore to be avoided, the inference were good. But it does not follow, that because it is a sin it ought therefore to be punished by the magistrate. For it does not belong unto the magistrate to make use of his sword in punishing everything, indifferently, that he takes to be a sin against God. Covetousness, uncharitableness, idleness, and many other things are sins, by the consent of all men, which yet no man ever said were to be punished by the magistrate. The reason is, because they are not prejudicial to other men's rights, nor do they break the public peace of societies. And neither pagans there, nor any dissenting Christians here, can with any right be deprived of their worldly goods, by the predominating faction of a court church, nor are any civil rights to be either changed or violated upon account of religion in one place more than another. These therefore, and the like, who attribute unto the faithful, religious, and orthodox, that is, in plain terms, unto themselves, any peculiar privilege or power above other mortals, in civil concernments, or who, upon pretense of religion, do challenge any manner of authority over such as are not associated with them in their ecclesiastical communion. I say these have no right to be tolerated by the magistrate, as neither those that will not own and teach the duty of tolerating all men in matters of mere religion. For what do all these and the like doctrines signify, but that those men may, and are ready upon any occasion to seize the government, and possess themselves of the estates and fortunes of their fellow subjects, and that they only ask leave to be tolerated by the magistrate so long, until they find themselves strong enough to effect it? Again, that church can have no right to be tolerated by the magistrate, which is constituted upon such a bottom, that all those who enter into it, do thereby, ipso facto, deliver themselves up to the protection and service of another prince. For by this means the magistrate would give way to the settling of a foreign jurisdiction in his own country, and suffer his own people to be listed, as it were, for soldiers against his own government. Nor does the public good require that such a church should be tolerated, which is so constituted that it cannot but produce such effects as these. Conclusion. In the last place, let us now consider what is the magistrate's duty in the business of toleration, which certainly is very considerable. Since it appears from what has been said that the power of the civil magistrate is confined to the care of the things of this world, and has nothing to do with the care of souls, and that the Church is a voluntary society of men, joining together for the worship of God in such manner as they judge acceptable to Him, and effectual to the salvation of their souls, it follows that the magistrate's office in the business of religion is only to preserve the peace and safety of the commonwealth, by preventing any violence or injury that one man may do to another upon pretense of religion. Whatsoever is lawful in the commonwealth cannot be prohibited by the magistrate in the church. Whatsoever is permitted unto any of his subjects for their ordinary use, neither can nor ought to be forbidden by him to any sect of people for their religious uses. If any man may lawfully take bread or wine, either sitting or kneeling in his own house, the law ought not to abridge him of the same liberty in his religious worship, though in the church the use of bread and wine be very different, and be there applied to the mysteries of faith and rites of divine worship. But those things that are prejudicial to the commonweal of a people in their ordinary use, and are therefore forbidden by laws, those things ought not to be permitted to churches in their sacred rites. Only the magistrate ought always to be very careful that he do not misuse his authority to the oppression of any church, under pretense of public good. It may be said, what if a church be idolatrous, is that also to be tolerated by the magistrate? I answer, what power can be given to the magistrate for the suppression of an idolatrous church, which may not in time and place be made use of to the ruin of an orthodox one? For it must be remembered that the civil power is the same everywhere, and that every church is orthodox to itself. If, therefore, the magistrate have any power to suppress an idolatrous church, it must be by some other rule than that it is idolatrous, for that would give every magistrate power to suppress every church but his own, which would be to put the power of persecution into every man's hand. The way, therefore, to prevent this inconvenience is to restrain the magistrate's power to those things only which are necessary to the peace and safety of the commonwealth, and to take away from him all pretense of meddling with religion under color of suppressing idolatry, or any other speculative opinions. And such is the nature of the understanding, that it cannot be compelled to the belief of anything by outward force. Confiscation of estate, imprisonment, torments, nothing of that nature can have any such efficacy as to make men change the inward judgment that they have framed of things. It may indeed be alleged that the magistrate may make use of arguments, and thereby draw the heterodox into the way of truth, and procure their salvation. I grant it, but this is common to him with other men. In teaching, instructing, and redressing the erroneous by reason, he may certainly do what becomes any good man to do. Magistracy does not oblige him to put off either humanity or Christianity, but it is one thing to persuade, another to command, one thing to press with arguments, another with penalties. This the civil power alone has a right to do. To the other good will is authority enough. Every man has commission to admonish, exhort, convince another of error, and, by reasoning, to draw him into truth, but to give laws, receive obedience, and compel with the sword, belongs to none but the magistrate. And, upon this ground, I affirm that the magistrate's power extends not to the establishing of any articles of faith, or forms of worship, by the force of his laws. For laws are of no force at all without penalties, and penalties in this case are absolutely impertinent, because they are not proper to convince the mind, neither the profession of any articles of faith, nor the conformity to any outward form of worship, can be of any use to the salvation of souls, unless the truth of the one and the acceptableness of the other unto God be thoroughly believed by those that so profess and practice. But penalties are no way capable to produce such belief. It is only light and evidence that can work a change in men's opinions, and that light can in no manner proceed from corporal sufferings, or any other outward penalties. If all these things be granted, it will appear that the business of the magistrate, in reference to religion, is only to take care that the commonwealth receive no detriment by reason of the opinions or practices of any man. If this be the extent of his power, and this the end of his office, it is plain that he has no authority to impose any penalties upon any man for his religion, unless his religion be such as manifestly tends to the disturbance of the public peace, or to the prejudice of the civil rights of his subjects. And therefore, though the magistrate may tolerate an idolatrous church, yet he is not bound to tolerate those who, under pretense of religion, disturb the peace, or invade the rights of others. These are not to be tolerated, not because they are idolatrous, but because they are seditious. In fine, the sum of all we drive at is that every man may enjoy the same rights that are granted to others. If any man fall into errors in matters of religion, it is not the business of the magistrate to correct him by force, but to leave him to the light of his own reason and conscience, and to the admonitions of his brethren. If any man's religion be such as makes him an ill subject, and dangerous to the public peace, the magistrate may restrain him, not as a heretic, but as a turbulent member of the commonwealth. But this restraint must be grounded upon plain evidence of his seditious designs, and not upon bare suspicion of his opinions. For since every church is orthodox to itself, and every man's opinion is truth to himself, if the magistrate might punish men for their opinions, there would be nothing left for him but to set up his own religion, and to persecute all others, which is the very thing we complain of, and which we say is contrary to the gospel, to reason, and to the true interest of mankind. Do you agree with Locke that the government should not control personal beliefs to keep society peaceful? Why or why not?
This has been an EMC reading from Liberty Myself. To learn more about our project to create decentralized media alternatives, visit libertymyself.com. By creating Liberty Myself, we create liberty for all.